Hey everybody, Chris with Wallowa Hikes. Welcome back. And today, well, are you ready to start planning your first trip? Because that's where we're at. I'm kind of excited for you. I remember planning my first trip way back. I was nervous, I was excited. So that's what we're going to do today. We're going to look into thinking about where you want to go, what you need to know, and how to plan for that trip. And so here we are. Let's get into it. So probably the first thing you want to know is where you're going to go. Now, I was pretty fortunate to grow up in a place where I was 9 miles from a trailhead that led to 500 miles of hiking trails. That's probably not the case for you. So if you're in the city, it's going to take a little bit more to get out in the country and into the wilderness. And if you're already in a rural setting, you may be close to nice backpacking areas. So think about where you want to go. And then how you plan for that trip is going to be different based on where you need to go, how you need to get there. So I think the best thing for me to do to walk you through this is to go back in time and plan the very first trip I went on as a backpacker. So as I said, I was really fortunate to live in a place near the mountains, a 15-minute drive from a trailhead. So if that's the case for you, wonderful. You may have some ideas already, and that's going to be as easy as getting up, taking your gear, and driving to the trailhead and getting on that trail. But it may be a little more involved for you if you're not near the mountains. And a lot of people do their first backpacking trips in national parks, and that's going to be different as well. So we can kind of look at the systems for making that happen for you. But let's start with the basics. So way back in time, when I finally decided I was going to stay out overnight, the first thing I did was to look at some maps. So if we take a look at what I did for my first trip, we're going to do this step by step. So step one is going to be figure out where you want to go. So let's talk about that a little bit. If you're near a place with trails that you can drive to, that's going to be wonderful. So if you're just driving to the trailhead from your house, no problem. But the trailhead may be many, many miles away. So in that case, you're going to have to consider if you want to get an early start, where you're going to stay. So that's as simple as looking at local lodging, getting a hotel room, something like that. And then when you know you're going to go, you're going to book that room for the night before. And that's probably something everybody here has done. So no problem there. Having said that, we're going to want to know exactly where we're going to camp, how many nights we're going to be out there, and how much stuff we're going to need, what stuff we're going to need. So that's going to be something we're going to look at. And again, I'm going to use my first trip as an example. Every trip is going to be different. So for instance, doing the McKenzie River Trail, I had to get a shuttle, park my car where I was going to end, take the shuttle to where I'm going to start. And I decided I was going to do that over 3 days. So I took appropriate gear for that. And I had to get up really early to drive about 80 miles to go to that shuttle. Now, in the old days, my first backpacking trip, I woke up at about 5 in the morning, got my stuff ready. I drove 15 minutes to the trailhead and started, and I ended in the same place. So I just parked my car there. And going to the Grand Canyon, that involved all kinds of stuff, getting really complicated permits and getting airfare and a rental car and a campground. So every trip's going to be different. Your first trip should be fairly simple, but if you're not near a trailhead, then of course you're going to have to figure in the planning. So where do we begin? Figure out where you want to go. You can look online. You can do a Google search for trails near me, backpacking areas near me, things like that. Or if you're going somewhere on vacation or whatever, and you know you're going to be in Yosemite, you can look at permits for that. We'll take a look at how we get permits for different places. Not every place needs permits. Some places do, some are hard to get, some are easy to get. Sometimes you just sign a little thing at the trailhead, but that's going to be different everywhere you go. So you want to look at where you want to go and do a Google search, and you can look on different sites. I'm going to show you some of those as well, like recreation.gov. And this is going to give you some information. It's going to really have a section that says what you need to know. So pick your destination first. After you've picked your destination, now, how long do you want to go out for? If your first trip is going to be just an overnight trip, great. You're going to need gear for one night. Could be fairly simple. If you're going multiple nights, then you're going to have to adjust what you need, especially food, things like that, for those nights. And we've talked a little bit about that stuff before, but so where do you want to go? How long do you want to go? Then figure out when you're going to go. When are you going to get back? Does anybody know where you're going? Are you going with friends? Are you going alone? So lots of stuff here. Once you know where you're going to go, see if there's maps online. See if you need to order maps. You can talk to local ranger stations if you need maps. If you have a app like Gaia, you're going to look at that area on Gaia. You're going to look at maps there, and that's what you're going to use out there possibly. So what else? Once you've decided where you're going to go, figure out how you're going to get there. Get your maps. We're going to plan your route. And that can be as simple as a pen and a map. So my very first trip was to a place called Glacier Lake in the Eagle Cap Wilderness of the Wallowa Mountains of Oregon. And the trailhead was at a place called Wallowa Lake, right next to the town of Joseph. So it was a 15-minute drive to the trailhead. So all I had to do was drive my car, park it, lock it, take the keys, obviously. So looking at the map, I could see that Glacier Lake was here deep in the wilderness. And of course, to get there, I would need to follow a trail. So it was as basic as taking a look at the trailhead and seeing what trail I needed to take. So trail 1820 came up here and branches off, goes to a place called Ice Lake, but I was going to Glacier Lake. So I was going to take trail 1820 all the way up here and then up to Glacier Lake right here. I decided that I was going to do a 3-night trip. So Glacier Lake was the destination. Based on the map, it was 13 miles. So I got an early start knowing it was going to take me a while. Generally, we walk at 3 miles an hour, but in the wilderness, I figure about 2 miles an hour. So I figured it'd be a long day. And so I started early. And from there, I decided I was going to go over what's called Glacier Pass and into what is known as the Lakes Basin. And so after a couple of nights, I hiked out this way and decided I was going to camp at Horseshoe Lake. And from there, getting back to my car, did I need to go back? No, because I saw that there are trails that come back down to the original trail and back up to the trailhead. So that's what I did in the old days. I got a map, I looked at the trails, and I figured out where I want to go and looked for cool places on that map and decided that's where I wanted to go see and that's where I wanted to go stay. Let's take a minute and just walk through the process I went through just from conceptualizing the trip through the planning to actually getting out there and doing it. So in planning that first trip, I just used that map to figure out where the trail was, where I needed to go. And how did I decide on that destination? Well, growing up in that area, kind of knew what was back there based on just living in that area and listening to the locals. So word of mouth, some of the best spots, just talk and listen. And I wanted to know as much as I could. So back then, there wasn't a ton of stuff on the internet. The internet was pretty new because I'm really old and that was a long time ago. But what I did do was I went and got a book. And that book, written by Fred Barstead, this is a book I've had forever. I've used this so much. Hiking Oregon's Eagle Cap Wilderness. And in this book, there's several hikes, and included in that was Glacier Lake and the Lakes Basin. So this kind of talked me through, has little maps in it and everything, and there's guidebooks on all kinds of places, so that's something to look at. But there's a lot of stuff on the internet, so wherever you decide you're going to go, you're going to be able to get lots of information on the internet. And picking up a guidebook is great. I have picked up books on every place that I've decided to go, just to learn as much as I could. So, but going back to my first trip, really back then, it was just picking up the map. I knew where I was going, but having that map helped me plan, helped me stay on track. And having that guidebook, which I took with me in that backpack, I actually have it on Kindle now because I've been back there so many times. But that let me kind of review where I was and look at where I'm going to be going. So as far as your destination, information on where you're going, you're going to find that on the internet. So now, what else did I do in my first trip to plan that and prepare that? So again, the trailhead was close. Once I knew where I was going, I really just had to think about what I was going to take, what I was going to eat, and things like that. So that's where a checklist comes in handy. So there are apps and lists all over the internet, and I actually have an app we can take a look at in another video where I'm able to enter all of my gear and can make lists of what I want to take. So back in those days, I just made a handwritten list of what I thought I needed to take so that I could then check it off and make sure I took all of that stuff. So you're going to find lots of backpacking lists on the internet. You can make your own list based on just gear we've talked about so far. REI has a great list. We'll take a look at that. So here's a gear list from REI. You can pick this up at REI for free. And taking a closer look, on the top we have primary gear, food and water, clothing, sun and bug protection. Primary gear, things like your backpack, your tent, sleeping bag, things are generally not going to be something you're going to forget. But as we get into these other items here, there are things you might overlook. So having a list is really great because you're going to want to check these things off as you pack them. Things like sunscreen are easy to forget. And as we go on, you can see that we have navigation items, camp bathroom, emergency gear. So again, the idea of these is that we are looking to make a list so we can check these things off as we pack them so we don't forget anything. Now, not everything on this list is essential, so you're going to decide what that list looks like for you. So having a list is a big part of the planning. Once you've got your list of what you need, then you can get your stuff ready. And once you've selected a date in the trailhead and you've made arrangements on how to get there, you're good. So take a look at that list. Make sure you've got the stuff you need. You don't want to forget anything out there, right? But generally it's not going to be the end of the world unless you forget a sleeping bag or something. So back then, as I got closer to the trip, I made my list. I got all the gear that I needed, and most of it was really heavy back then because I didn't have a lot of money and I was just starting out, and that may be the case for you, and that's okay. And then that was it. So as I got closer to the trip, I packed my gear into my backpack. I had my backpack ready to go. And the day of, I threw my backpack in the car, drove to the trailhead, and I was off on a great adventure. So that's going to be the most basic planning you can do. Now, depending on where you're going, you may need to get permits, and that can be challenging in certain places. So most of those are going to be through recreation.gov. And let's take a look at what that website looks like. So just taking a quick look here, going to recreation.gov. There's also an app for this, but you can just type in where you want to go. So like if we want to go to the Red River Gorge in Kentucky, we can type that in, we can take a look, and it's got information on there, but nothing about permits. So it looks like you wouldn't need permits if you needed to go there or wanted to go there. But if, for instance, we wanted to go to Yosemite and go into the backcountry, we can go back and just type in Yosemite, and that's going to bring up different things. We're looking at wilderness permits for Yosemite National Park. And when you go in there, you can take a look. It's going to give you information on the rules, the times for booking all those permits and things like that. And as you scroll down, it gives you all the information you need. It talks about fees and deadlines, and when you decide what you want to do, where you want to go, you can click on that button that says check availability. And that's how you're going to get permits if you need permits for where you are going. Now, you're not going to need permits for every place you go, but the more people are getting out there, the more a lot of these areas are requiring permits, and how you get those permits can be challenging. So that's something to think about, but lots of places don't need permits for backpacking, and hopefully you can find one of those places, because the less you have to do to prepare, the easier it's going to be to just get out there and enjoy it. So what else do we need to talk about? So as far as planning the trip, so other things we might want to think about when planning a trip. It's not just where we're going, when we're going, how we're going to get there, making sure that we have a map, but also there's other factors that are going to come into play. One may be weather. So possibly it's going to rain when you're going. And so you're going to need to plan accordingly when you're selecting your gear, to have like rain gear if it's going to rain. If it's going to be really cold, take into account weather and things like that when you're thinking about what you're going to take, because what you're going to take is going to change depending on what trip you're taking, where you're going, when you're going, things like that. And so one list isn't going to be the one list for every trip. So consider time of year, weather, elevation. As you go up in elevation, it gets colder. If you're going with other people, is there going to be gear that you share? And if so, who's going to carry it? Who's going to be responsible for making sure that somebody brings a stove? So you're going to want to talk to your group about things like that. If you're sleeping in a tent with somebody else, who's going to carry the tent, or are you going to split parts of that up? So those are things to think about. If you're going with 5 people, it makes no sense to have 5 water filters or 5 stoves. So something to think about. If you're going solo, it's a lot more straightforward. You are going to bring everything that you are going to need. And that's part of planning your trip. Now, another thing to keep in mind is if you are, for instance, in New York City or in Germany, I would really want to caution you about flying with gear. So a couple of things. Fuel for stoves is not allowed on airlines. And so that's something, if you're flying to where you're going, you're going to need to pick that up if you're using a backpacking stove. Trekking poles are not allowed in carry-ons. Some people will disagree with that, but generally you don't want to gamble with that. So when I went to Utah, I had to check that in my luggage. So just something to think about if you're having to travel a long ways away. But hopefully you live in a place where you can actually just drive to where you want to go, because that's really going to make things less complicated for your first trip. I highly recommend that if you can, go somewhere you can drive to, because that's just going to make it less complicated so that you can be more focused on that experience. So yeah, I use a paper map and a pen, and that's how I planned that trip. Now you can do that on your apps, Gaia, things like that. We're not going to really go into that. I've been talking a lot already, but if you get the Gaia app, you're going to just go online, look at the instructions on how you can create a route on there, and that's going to be a really great tool for planning a trip. And you can plan several. I have so many maps on Gaia for different trips I've been on and plan to go on, so that's really great too. But basically, I guess there's really not that much to it. It doesn't have to be that complicated. Hopefully you can find a place just to hike to and set up a camp overnight and enjoy scenery by a lake or waterfall, whatever, and you know, have that experience. One night out is, you know, a good start. So as we move along, I think maybe I'll make some short videos on things like the app that I use to track my gear and make lists, because that would be super helpful. Thank you guys for watching. Hopefully you've got a little bit of information there on how to plan this first trip, and you know, you can get together with your buddies and get excited about figuring out where you're going to go and how long you're going to be there and what you're going to take, and get out there. So step away from the phone or the TV and go start planning your trip. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.